Joy to the world, the Lord is come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare him room. In heaven and nature sing. In heaven and nature sing. In heaven and nature sing.
Joyful all ye nations rise, join the triumph of the skies. With angelic hosts proclaim, Christ is born in Bethlehem. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King.
You may get a sentimental feeling when you hear voices singing, let's be jolly. Deck the halls with boughs of holly, rocking around the Christmas tree. Have a happy holiday. Everyone dancing merrily in the new old-fashioned way.
The party's on, the feeling's here, that only comes this time of year. Simply having a wonderful Christmas time. Simply having a wonderful Christmas time.
It's the most wonderful time of the year.
With the kids jingle belling
And everyone telling you be of good cheer. It's the most wonderful time of the year. It's the happiest season of all. With those holiday greetings and gay happy meetings when friends come to call. It's the happiest season of all.
joyful, joyful, we adore thee, God of glory, Lord of love. Hearts unfold like flowers before thee, opening to the sun above.
Melt the clouds of sin and sadness, drive the dark of doubt away. Giver of immortal gladness, fill us with the light of day.
We sing joy to the world. We sing joy to the world. We sing joy to the world. We sing joy to the world.
Well, thank you, Jesus. The Christmas season of 2020 has finally begun, and it couldn't have started a moment too soon. But it didn't start at the same moment for all of us. I mean, for many, Christmas begins with that first Black Friday purchase, now made conveniently from your device, from the comfort of your home, and delivered to your door. Or maybe it begins for you when the decorations are transported from their dark hibernation place and once again are put on full bright display in your home. Well, for others, there are certain traditions that trigger the change for you into Christmas mode, maybe an annual family reunion or a service at church, or watching that movie or playing that song. We all start at a slightly different time. We all use slightly different launching points, but we move from our differences into some commonalities. Our diverse lives, our unique journeys, our varied traditions intersect for a brief moment towards a common goal. This year, more than ever. Because what Christmas brings is something we all long for, some things we all long for. Peace in spite of chaos, hope instead of fear, promise in the place of uncertainty, and joy in a world that has seemed to have lost all sense of it. That's what this series is about. It's about finding the common themes that Christmas brings, some guarantees of it from the pages in the Bible, concepts that are more than just ideas or ambiguous philosophies, but tangible, life-altering truths that can change the course of our lives and, frankly, the course of our world. And while we always benefit from them, at the end of this year in particular, we need these truths now more than ever. So we begin today with joy. Joy is a funny word. It's a word we don't use much, except for at this time of year. Joy seems to get caged by our calendar, walled in firmly between Thanksgiving and New Year's Eve. Joy apparently also has a color scheme, red and green, and it's as easily unpacked as a Mariah Carey tune. We love to sing about joy at Christmas, right? I mean, joy to the world, joyful, joyful, we adore you, have a holly, jolly Christmas. We're all about light shows and bribing our kids to smile for a picture on Santa's lap and the surprise of gifts that we think bring joy to the people we love. This is the time of year where we crave joy, we insist on joy, and we do everything we can to manufacture joy. I've never met anybody who didn't at least say that they wanted joy in their life. Now, I've met people who definitely put up barriers to joy, but that wasn't their intent. And I've met people who struggled to find joy, but joy was still their dream. But what if? What if the pathway to joy was not found in our creative fabrication of it? What if the secret to true, lasting joy isn't really even found in the happy hymns of Christmas carols or the momentary thrill of unwrapping gifts or even the magic of mythical Christmas characters? I actually think that I've found some of the clues to discovering year-round joy, and I found it in one of the stories of the Bible that's related to Christmas. Luke tells us about it. He says, in the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. His wife, Elizabeth, was also a descendant of Aaron. This is important because Aaron is the priestly line in the Jewish faith. Both of them, Elizabeth and Zechariah, were righteous in the sight of God. They observed all of the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly, but they were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were both very old. Here's a couple who got married, and they wanted to start a family, and this was expected, especially in that day. Everybody in that day has children. Nobody in that era would opt to not have kids. Nobody. So when people got married, they usually got pregnant quickly as possible. For a couple to not be able to conceive, well, they would be considered cursed by God. They would be assumed to have some kind of sin in their lives, which is why God wouldn't allow them to have kids. That was the way people thought. So Zechariah and Elizabeth, they had waited a long time, too long, really. They prayed from the moment that they were married that they would have a child, but no child came. Through the years, and without access to modern medicine that you and I can access today, all they could do was hope and pray, hope and pray, and be faithful. With each unanswered prayer and every passing year, Elizabeth and Zechariah became ever more aware that time was not on their side, and eventually they had no choice but to accept reality. No child had come, no child was coming. It was no longer even possible. So they stopped hoping for a child. It was pointless. and they quit praying for a child. No need to waste God's time or their energy on impossible dreams. They may have stopped hoping and praying, but they remained faithful. Elizabeth and Zechariah wouldn't be shunned per se by the people around them, but people would still identify them by their childlessness. It would be the thing people would talk about. They would say things like, see that guy over there? That's Zechariah. His wife Elizabeth is barren. Such a shame, because I bet they'd make great parents. But the greatest labeler of this condition for them was not really in the larger community, but among people in their own family. This was the thing that everybody else in their family would whisper about and speculate over, and they would form rumors around it. They would say things like, I heard they weren't getting along. I think she even moved into another room. I mean, you can't get pregnant like that. And others would say things like, Zechariah is a priest? I mean, what kind of a priest has the kind of sin that obviously prevents them from having kids? Mom told me that he was good at hiding things, but don't tell anybody that I said she said that. That's how it would work. Elizabeth and Zechariah, they didn't have to have anybody whisper about their childlessness. They knew well about their childlessness. They labeled themselves as they watched other couples take their own kids for granted, all the while desperately wanting just one of their own. So they examined their lives and they blamed themselves, and they endured the family gossip and the community rumors, and week after week, month after month, year after year, their pain and their anxiety would get worse. What began as anticipation eventually morphed into discouragement, which became disillusionment, which then resulted in a bitter resolve that the one thing they most wanted would actually never come. Eventually, they couldn't deny reality. And Elizabeth was beyond childbearing capability, which some translations of Luke's words politely label her as being well along in years. That's what that means. But through it all, they remained faithful. Once, when Zechariah's division was on duty, remember he was a priest, and he was serving as a priest before God, he was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And when the time for the burning of the incense came, all the assembled worshipers were praying outside. So Zechariah is an ordinary priest, one of about 8,000 priests living in Palestine during that time. Ironically, interestingly, at least to me, his name, the name Zechariah, was a very popular name for a priest. It means the Lord remembered. It's ironic because Zechariah felt like the Lord forgot. The honor of offering the incense, burning the incense, was the most significant event in Zechariah's life up to that point. Many priests never had the privilege of doing this, and no priest was allowed to do it more than once if they were ever chosen. So now Zechariah's day had finally come. He had been chosen by lot, think drawing straws or the lottery. He had been chosen by lot to be the priest for the day. And I can imagine that his adrenaline begins to flow, and he's alert, and his senses are on high alert, and he's looking at everything, and he's noting every detail, and he's got to be thinking, I can't wait to get back home and tell Elizabeth about this. Outside, in the court of Israel, now where the other people would be gathered, because only the priest was allowed to go inside, there would be faithful people out there worshiping and praying. And then came that moment for Zechariah to, by himself, step inside into the holy place. And so he walks in, and before him rose this richly embroidered curtain, the curtain separating the Holy of Holies. And in this fabric were woven into the fabric cherubim, and there were different colors of scarlet and blue and purple and gold, and it was beautiful, and almost nobody ever got to see it. It was amazing, and directly in front of him was the horned golden altar of incense. And all of that, as remarkable as it was, all of that was normal for this annual tradition, and then something happened that wasn't. Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, to Zechariah. standing at the right side of the altar of incense. And when Zechariah saw him, he was startled and was gripped with fear. But the angel said to him, "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife, Elizabeth, will bear you a son, and you are to call him John." Now, a lot of times when we read the Bible, particularly when we get into Christmas scriptures, we blow through them. We remember the thing we've been told. We don't see it fresh in a new way like we've never seen it before. I want you to back up with me for a minute because there's some humor in this conversation. And in order for us to understand it, I want you to do a hypothetical with me. I want you to just imagine, stay with me in this because we're going to get somewhere. I want you to imagine that you have a 7-year-old and your 7-year-old asks you, as their parent, for a bike for Christmas. They want a Spider-Man bike like Pastor Vernon's son probably got at his Spider-Man birthday party. If you weren't here last week, you should go catch up. You'll know what I'm talking about. Anyway, your 7-year-old wants a Spider-Man bike. He picks it out. It's shiny red. The spokes of the wheels look like spider webs. It comes with a costume that will make your kid look like Spider-Man. It's the only thing your kid says that they want for Christmas, the only thing. And it's sized just right for a child his age. But then Christmas 2020 comes, and it brings the disappointment that has pretty much defined this entire year for all of us because your kid does not get the Spider-Man bike. He's a good kid, though. He takes it in stride. He enjoys the other gifts instead, but he doesn't forget. He doesn't forget about the Spider-Man bike, and so he puts it at the top of his list, which he's already preparing, and next year he asks for it again, and he doesn't get it again. And then in 2022, he asks again, and again, it doesn't come. And his childhood, he's growing up now, his childhood gives way to adolescence. Now he's a teenager, but he keeps asking year after year. He's like obsessed with this thing. He's got to have it. And the innocent dream never really goes away, but then he turns 20. And he finally has to admit to himself that, that's a kid's toy. I'm too old for a Spider-Man bike. So he quits asking. Finally, he quits asking. Now, stay with me. Imagine it's the year 2050. Your 7-year-old is now 37 years old. And after decades without a mention of this bike, you remember, you the parent. So your nearly 40-year-old son comes to your house for the annual Christmas gathering. He brings his kids with him. Now he's got kids, and everyone opens their gifts. And then after everybody's finished, you get up a little more slowly because now you're 70 in this hypothetical, and you wink at your adult son, your 40-year-old son almost, with this big smile on your face, and you say this, "Son, your mother and I have one more surprise for you." And you go into the other room, and you walk back in, beaming, wheeling in a brand new Spider-Man bike, sized perfectly for your 7-year-old. And you say, "Son, I heard you all those years ago when you told me what you wanted. I made a note of it, and here's your bike." That's kind of what's happening here. Zechariah prayed for a child from the moment he married Elizabeth. He prayed that prayer virtually every day until she could no longer physically conceive a child, and then he prayed for a little while past that. And now this angel comes. It's been a long time since he prayed that prayer. Now the angel comes and says, "Your prayer's been heard." Zechariah's got to be thinking, what? What are you talking about? I haven't prayed that prayer for years. That was yesterday's prayer. She's too old now. I'm too old now. But here's what Zechariah didn't fully understand. It's what I think we've all forgotten, or maybe we never knew in the first place. Joy comes through faithfulness. Joy comes through faithfulness. See, when God considered who would be the right parents to bring the messenger who would prepare the way for the Messiah, he didn't care that Elizabeth and Zechariah were biologically too old to have a baby. It was of no consequence to God that they had no other children. God could overcome aging anatomy and parental inexperience. What he needed was someone who was faithful. And he found exactly who he was looking for in Elizabeth and Zechariah. Your wife, Elizabeth, will bear you a son, and you are to call him John. And he will be a joy and a delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He is never to take wine or other fermented drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before he's born. He'll bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God, and he will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. John, the long-awaited child of Zechariah and Elizabeth, was not just their child. He was the precursor to Jesus, the Messiah. Prophets who lived long before this moment had predicted that one person would come before the Messiah who would prepare the way for the Messiah, like Isaiah, who saw a vision and wrote it down 600 years before Zechariah encountered this angel this day. Isaiah saw a voice of one calling, "In the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, and the rugged places made plain. And the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all people will see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken." Now, you might have heard this text, and you might be asking, well, how do we know this was about John? It seems not all that clear. Well, Matthew, who is a contemporary of John, he lived the same time that this kid grew up. Matthew writes about John and about Jesus, and he said this in Matthew chapter 3, "In those days, John the Baptist came," this is the same John who's the son of Zechariah and Elizabeth. "In those days, John the Baptist came, preaching in the wilderness of Judea and saying, 'Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near.' This is he who was spoken of through the prophet Isaiah." Then he quotes him, "A voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare a way for the Lord, make straight paths for him." Someone had to come. Someone had to come before Jesus to prepare a way for Jesus. And everybody knew that somebody was going to come before the Messiah. Every Jewish person knew that in theory. But for all practical purposes, many people had just stopped living like it was ever going to happen. They were consumed with what they didn't have, but they desperately wanted. And many in the process just stopped being faithful. They no longer had joy, and they mistakenly diagnosed their lack of joy as resulting from their lack of something external, something they didn't have, like a child, or like liberty. Since they were living under Roman rule, they were a conquered people. In other words, they did exactly what you and I tend to do. They misunderstood joy, and they actually defined it incorrectly. Would you believe that this still happens today? I had to look this up. I just needed to confirm my theory, so I want to give you the official dictionary.com definition of joy. Here it is. Joy, this is a quote now, joy is the emotion of great delight or happiness caused by something exceptionally good or satisfying. Joy is the emotion of great delight or happiness caused by something exceptionally good or satisfying. And at first glance, you might be nodding your head. What's wrong with it, you might ask? Only this: it's all wrong. Like in its entirety. In fact, I submit to you that this definition of joy is entirely backwards. So let me define happiness and joy for you in their distinctness and differentiate the two for you. Here we go. Happiness is an emotion based on external circumstances and factors from the outside pushing in. But joy is a resolve based on internal faithfulness and a spiritual dedication from the inside pushing out. You see how they're completely opposite of each other? In Deuteronomy, God ties the joy of his people to their faithfulness to him. In Judges, when the people of God acted faithfully, they had joy. In Chronicles, over and over, we see that joy comes from being in the presence of God, being faithful to God. Job said that his joy in unrelenting pain was his faithfulness to God. Nehemiah famously told the people that the joy of the Lord was their strength. Over and over and over, the Bible defines joy, and it is not about what is happening around us, but about the faithfulness that is within us. Even when the world is not right, even when our circumstances are challenging or bad or downright awful, joy cannot be taken from us, because the pathway to joy is not out there, it's in here. It's through my faithfulness to God, and nothing can stop that. Well, nothing except me. I'm the only one who controls whether or not I am faithful to God. No one can make me be faithful. No one can stop me from being faithful, not even God. I alone have that power. And what that means, this is the best part, what that means is that I also control the joy factor in my life. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm always happy with my circumstances. Zechariah and Elizabeth, they weren't happy with their childlessness, but that didn't rob them of their joy, because they knew that come what may, even if they never had a child, which they eventually understood that they probably wouldn't, even then, they had decided they were going to finish their lives as faithful servants to God, and ultimately He would reward them. Joy was their defining characteristic, even when life had not gone like they planned. And that can be true for you too. We go through the motions. We sing joy to the world and hark the herald angels sing, but do we really believe that God did this marvelous thing that actually has the power to infiltrate our family disasters and our national crises and our global pandemic and bring joy not just for a month or a season, but for the whole of our lives? And to get it, are we willing to be faithful to God no matter what? Because one leads to the other. And that means that regardless of the circumstances of your life, you can have an increasing level of joy that can start right now. You can literally sing joy all the time. Joy that is inside, pushing out of you, shining the light of Jesus to everyone you encounter. If every one of us today could willingly accept responsibility for the joy in our lives and focus on faithfulness to God, the power of God might be unleashed on us in a way we can't even imagine, in a way that we all need right now, especially right now as we begin Christmas 2020. So let me invite you to join us right now as we faithfully together sing joy.
Joy to the world, the Lord is come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare him room, and heaven and nature sing. And heaven and nature sing. We will sing joy. And makes the nations prove the glories of his righteousness and wonders of his love.
joy. We will exude joy from the inside out because we will be faithful. Check out the follow-up teaching for yourself or your small group on our website, pccwire.net. Invite someone to join you for church next Sunday as we continue celebrating Christmas. Have a great week.